Good evening from New York. It is 2026. We are 9 months out from Election Day in a volatile midterm year, and the political temperature in Washington is already boiling. The stakes are enormous: control of the House, control of the Senate, the direction of federal investigations, the durability of executive power, and looming over all of it is one man, Donald Trump. For months, Trump made one thing unmistakably clear: winning the midterms was not just about legislative ambition, it was about survival. He said it openly at rallies, hinted at it in interviews, and repeated it in off-script remarks. If Republicans lose control of Congress, Democrats will find a reason to impeach him again. He framed the midterms as a firewall against accountability. And here's the part that matters: he wasn't entirely wrong, because impeachment was always tied to congressional control. A House majority can launch investigations, committees can subpoena, testimony can be compelled, articles can be drafted, the Senate can try and convict. Trump understood that political math better than anyone. What he didn't anticipate was that the math would eventually shift inside his own party. Before the impeachment vote that changed American history, there was another front in this struggle: control of the election system itself. In the House, Republican leadership advanced sweeping legislation branded as the Save America Act. Championed by Trump and pushed aggressively by House Speaker Mike Johnson, the bill required proof of citizenship to register to vote nationwide. Supporters framed it as election integrity. Opponents called it voter suppression. The vote was razor-thin, 218 to 213, with nearly every Democrat opposing it. Johnson defended the measure bluntly, arguing that anyone against it must want to cheat the system. The rhetoric was sharp, absolute, and polarizing. But in the Senate, the math looked very different. Democrats held enough seats to block the bill under the 60-vote threshold. The legislation stalled, and then something far bigger happened. The United States Senate voted 68 to 32 to convict Donald Trump on impeachment charges. 68. Let that number settle in. Under the Constitution, conviction requires 2/3 of the Senate. That threshold is intentionally high. It is designed to prevent partisan removals. It is meant to ensure that only overwhelming evidence, combined with cross-party consensus, can remove a president. For the first time in American history, that threshold was met. Trump had survived 2 previous impeachments. In both cases, Senate Republicans stood by him. Acquittals followed. He declared total vindication. The pattern seemed unbreakable, but this time was different. The evidence was not centered on political disputes or rhetorical excess. It revolved around a military operation launched without congressional authorization, an operation in Venezuela that resulted in civilian casualties, international backlash, and a direct constitutional confrontation over war powers. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, Congress holds the authority to declare war. Presidents may act defensively under certain conditions, but sustained military operations require legislative involvement. Trump bypassed that structure entirely. Hearings began in the House. Generals testified that warnings had been ignored. Legal scholars outlined the constitutional breaches. Career officials described a decision-making process that sidelined both military counsel and congressional consultation. And then came the testimony that shifted everything. Former administration insiders, including Trump's own chief of staff, spoke under oath about a pattern of behavior that painted a stark picture: a president who viewed congressional authorization as optional. A president who believed executive power could stretch as far as political will allowed. The House voted to impeach on charges including abuse of power, violation of war powers, and obstruction of Congress. A small but symbolically critical group of Republicans joined Democrats. It was not a landslide, but it was a crack in what had once been a solid wall. Then the trial moved to the Senate. This is where history pivoted. Republican senators faced 2 forces pulling in opposite directions. On one side, sworn testimony, constitutional clarity, and mounting public concern. On the other, a loyal voter base that still viewed Trump as indispensable. For many, the calculation was existential. A vote to convict could mean the end of a political career. At first, most Republicans signaled resistance. But as the trial unfolded, as more details emerged about the Venezuela operation and internal warnings that had been dismissed, momentum shifted. One Republican senator announced support for conviction, then another. then a third. It became easier to be the fifth defector than the first. When the roll call began, the chamber was silent. 50 Democrats voted to convict. That was expected. But then Republican names followed. Some predictable moderates, others surprising conservatives from deeply red states. 18 Republicans ultimately joined Democrats, 68 to 32, convicted, removed. The moment the presiding officer's gavel came down, Trump ceased to be president. Not in 10 days, not after a transition period, immediately. Under the Constitution, the vice president assumes the presidency upon removal. J.D. Vance prepared to take the oath of office. The transfer of authority was automatic and instantaneous. Nuclear codes, classified briefings, executive authority, all shifted. Trump was now a private citizen. That change carries profound implications. First, presidential immunity tied to office dissolves upon removal. Department of Justice policy that delays prosecution of sitting presidents no longer applies. Investigations that had been paused can proceed. Grand juries can move forward without constitutional complications tied to executive privilege. Second, the Senate may hold a separate vote, requiring only a simple majority, to bar a removed official from holding future federal office. If such a vote succeeds, Trump would be legally prohibited from running in 2028 or beyond. Third, the political earthquake inside the Republican Party cannot be overstated. 18 Republican senators voting to remove a president from their own party represents not a minor fracture, but a structural break. The divide between institutional conservatives and Trump loyalists is now formal, recorded in the congressional record forever. The 2028 presidential landscape shifted overnight. Potential candidates who had waited in Trump's shadow suddenly saw daylight. Governors, senators, former cabinet officials, figures who once hesitated to challenge Trump, now faced an open field. On the Democratic side, campaign strategies built around opposing Trump required rapid recalibration. But the constitutional clarity of removal did not translate into emotional acceptance. Trump publicly rejected the verdict. He labeled it illegitimate. He described it as a coup. On social media, supporters echoed those claims. Calls for protests surged. Some rhetoric veered into dangerous territory. This is the scenario the framers of the Constitution hoped would never be tested. What happens when a removed president refuses to accept removal? Legally, the answer is straightforward. The Senate's conviction is final. There is no appeal. The Supreme Court does not review impeachment verdicts. The process is political and constitutional, not judicial. But legality and compliance are not always aligned. Security agencies prepared contingency plans. The Secret Service, tasked with protecting both former presidents and current ones, faced a delicate transition. Military leadership publicly affirmed recognition of the constitutional chain of command. Generals reiterated that allegiance is to the Constitution, not to individuals. The peaceful transfer of power, even under removal, depends on institutional cohesion. Thus far, those institutions held. Still, the episode exposed vulnerabilities. The impeachment mechanism functioned as designed. A president accused of serious constitutional violations was investigated, impeached by the House, and convicted by a supermajority of the Senate. That is the system working, but it required extraordinary circumstances. It required bipartisan courage. It required senators willing to risk their careers. It required evidence so overwhelming that partisan loyalty fractured under its weight. That is not a routine safeguard. That is an emergency brake. The broader political environment remains volatile. The midterm elections are still approaching. Voters will now decide the balance of power in a post-Trump presidency under President Vance. Campaign messaging has already shifted from defending Trump to redefining Republican identity. Democrats frame the removal as proof that constitutional accountability still exists. Republicans are split between those arguing that the party must move forward and those insisting that Trump was wronged. Internationally, allies watch carefully. The United States demonstrated that even its highest office is subject to constitutional constraint. That fact strengthens democratic credibility abroad. But the turbulence leading to that moment also signals fragility. History rarely unfolds in clean lines. It moves in jolts. On that Senate floor, when 68 senators pronounced a president guilty, the country crossed into uncharted territory. The removal of a president is not simply a political headline. It is a constitutional stress test. It is the most severe accountability mechanism available. Donald Trump built a political brand around dominance, defiance, and resilience. He survived scandals that would have ended other careers. He turned impeachment into a rallying cry. But this time, the arithmetic changed. 68 names, 18 from his own party. The gavel fell, and the presidency ended in that instant. Nothing about American politics will look the same after this. The balance between executive power and congressional oversight has been redrawn. The Republican Party faces an identity crisis that may define it for a generation. The Democratic Party must now navigate a political landscape without its most polarizing opponent. The Constitution held, but it bent under strain. And the country now faces a future shaped by the consequences of that moment. A future where the removal of a president is no longer theoretical, but lived history. The United States just did something it had never done before. It removed a president through conviction. The immediate shock will fade. Campaigns will continue. Legislation will resume. News cycles will turn. But beneath the surface, the precedent remains. Power can be checked. Authority can be revoked. And even the most dominant political figure can be reduced, in a single roll call, to a private citizen. History did not whisper. It spoke loudly, and nothing will ever be quite the same again.